WrestleMania. What can you say about it that hasn't already been said? It is the biggest event year after year that grosses an insane amount of money and interest worldwide. And as an event, WrestleMania has spanned 38 years, and there's been more than 500 matches wrestled in the history of the event. Some good, some okay. And of course, there's been a few bad ones here and there. But today, for the first time ever, we here at Pro Wrestling Planet are going to definitively rank for you the top 100 greatest WrestleMania matches of all time. Now, of course, like most things, this list is subjective and it is our list. So this is fun. This is our opinions. Nowhere near close to fact. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, yada, yada, yada. Let's go. Number 100, Hulk Hogan versus King Kong Bundy, WrestleMania 2. WrestleMania was in its infancy, and at this point, you'd be hard-pressed to say that many of the matches from the first two events were anything of what you would call a mat classic. With that being said, WrestleMania was built on the back of Hulk Hogan, and at this point, in 1986, it didn't matter how good the match was. People just wanted to see Hulk Hogan, and this match sneaks into the list at number 100 because it was just important enough to the legacy that would become WrestleMania and ultimately Hulk Hogan. Number 99, Jake Roberts versus Rick Martel, blindfold match, WrestleMania 7. Frank Gotch probably rolled in his grave on this one. Nonetheless, this match was the first and last of its kind. Yes, two guys actually wrestled a match blindfolded, and it was about as good as you would imagine for two guys not being able to see. At the end of the day, it's still a match that I believe everyone should see at least once in their lives, if not just only for its amazingly unique quality. Number 98, Taka Michinoku versus Aguila, WrestleMania 14. The year was 1998, and WCW and WWE were embroiled at a Monday Night War. You may have heard of it. Anyway, WCW had a strong hold on WWE for the better part of 2 years, from September 95 to April of 98. WCW was considered by many the top wrestling promotion in the country, believe it or not. A big part of that was the action of WCW's Cruiserweight division, who were having exciting matches every week, and WWE tried as they may to match the action that the Cruiserweight division brought, so they countered by starting their own light heavyweight division. And while neither concept was necessarily new, WCW's division was light years above WWE's, and while it was still an uphill battle for years, and still is today rather, this match is special because it ushered in an officially faster-paced style to the WWE and to WrestleMania match. Number 97, Triple H versus Goldust, WrestleMania 13. WrestleMania 13 was a time of transition in the WWE. It's the last WrestleMania before WWE began selling Attitude officially. And in this match, we had a Triple H that was still a few months from starting DX. This was still one of the more interesting matches on what is considered to be a lackluster WrestleMania 13 card. The whole show is a tough watch for the most part because it's literally the brutal end of the new generation era. Still, this match is a solid go back and watch. Number 96, Kevin Owens versus Seth Rollins, WrestleMania 36. Pandemic-a-mania, if you will. COVID-mania, whatever you want to call it, will probably go down as the absolute worst WrestleMania ever produced. From no fault of the wrestlers themselves, it all had to do with the fact that there were no fans anywhere to be seen to enjoy the festivities. And while I felt comforted at the time to watch this show because it gave me a feeling of everything was going to be okay, you go back and try to watch it now, and it's almost like watching some weird horror movie. In any event though, Kevin Owens and Seth Rollins decided to go all out for their match, and it's easier to watch than most of the card due to the prevalent brawling. Makes it seem like one of those old empty arena brawls that were always fun. Number 95, Andre the Giant versus Big John Studd, WrestleMania 1. Okay, hear me out, alright? While this match was no technical marvel by any means, it's what WrestleMania is all about in my opinion, and that's wants entertainment. And as a child, for whatever reason, this was my favorite match on the old WrestleMania VHS tape. If you take it literal, the guy body slams a guy, big deal. But everyone involved found a way to take something so simple and make it over the top and entertaining. Now, it hasn't been done since, probably for good reason, but hey, I thought this one needed to make the list. Number 94, Bret Hart versus Yokozuna, WrestleMania 10. Some would argue that their WrestleMania 9 match was better from a technical standpoint, and I somewhat agree with that, but here we get the happy ending, and life is all about the happy ending, and that's why this version of the match makes this list here. Bret finally receives his crowning moment. The celebration afterwards gives me chills to this day. I wish they did more stuff like this these days. Number 93, Jake Roberts versus Rick Rude, WrestleMania 4. You could argue Jake was one of the most over acts in the company at this point, and even though this show is all about Savage winning the title, many forget that this workhorse match fell somewhere in the mid-card, but went to a 15-minute time limit draw. Both men were at their peak, you could say, both physically and character-wise. Number 92, Bam Bam Bigelow versus LT, WrestleMania 11. I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for this one, but I don't care. WrestleMania 11 was arguably the worst WrestleMania ever produced. WrestleMania 36 said, hold my beer. With that out of the way, though, this celebrity match carried the show and was built up as what everyone wanted to see. Bam Bam did such an amazing job guiding LT, what ended up being a very entertaining match. And that's the line we kind of draw with this list, as you'll see. What's the line between a good match and an entertaining match, and what should be considered better? I guess that's just in the eye of the beholder. Number 91, Zack Ryder versus Kevin Owens versus Dolph Ziggler versus The Miz versus Sami Zayn versus Sin Cara versus Stardust. Ah, yes, the annual WrestleMania ladder match, which had been a tradition that had been lived up to for a number of years. Of course, what Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon started in 1994 evolved into the TLC matches, which then from there turned into Money in the Bank matches. And when that branched into its own pay-per-view, we still needed ladder matches and stunts at WrestleMania. So we get these multi-person ladder matches for the Intercontinental title. WWE had done this same match the year before with different guys. And while in my mind it's hard to separate the two, this one was way more memorable on the whole because the ending was absolutely shocking, as no one expected Zack Ryder to win the match. It gave Ryder's fans some false hope after all those years that he was finally going to get a main event push, but that also turned out not to fruitize. Number 90, the Money in the Bank match at WrestleMania 21. There's a first time for everything, and while the ladder match itself was nothing new, in 2005, as a big credit to WWE, they somehow found a way to innovate the match even further. The idea was actually first given the name of the Hollywood Dream ladder match. You see, WrestleMania that year went Hollywood, and the original idea, according to Chris Jericho in his second autobiography, was for the winner to receive a Hollywood Dream of their choice. Jericho would go on to say that the match would have been won by Rob Van Dam, and his wish would have been to revive ECW. Somewhere along the way, the match was switched to Edge winning and receiving the famous title shot at any time gimmick. RVD would win the next year, though. It's hard to think that this concept at this point is over 20 years old. Number 89, the Nasty Boys versus the Hart Foundation, WrestleMania 7. The Hart Foundation were mega over at this point in the game, and in fact, this would be Bret's last Mania as part of a tag team. Neidhart himself wasn't quite as fortunate. Either way, the crowd in this match sounds like Beatlemania was going on. Let's call it Brettamania, if you will. The crowd was eager for a Hart Foundation win, but it was not to be. The Nasty Boys ended the historic reign of the Harts and would officially split sometime after this WrestleMania. Number 88, Brock Lesnar versus Bill Goldberg, WrestleMania 33. At WrestleMania 33, you could spell redemption B-I-L LL. 13 years after their disastrous WrestleMania 20 encounter, this match saw both men come full circle and square off once again be in a semi-main event. Different circumstances this time though, as Brock was at the beginning of his gatekeeper role as WWE champion, and while it was Goldberg who had just returned from a long hiatus to a surprisingly warm welcome by WWE crowds. Unlike their first WrestleMania encounter at WrestleMania 20, these two went completely opposite of that and had the most brutal 5-minute title match you will ever see in WrestleMania history. While it was quick, it got the job done and was objectively a way better match than the botch-riddled Undertaker versus Roman match that actually headlined that year's show. Number 87, Ricky Steamboat versus Greg the Hammer Valentine, WrestleMania 4. We're gonna go back here to the WrestleMania 4 tournament and this was another workhorse match. You know, Valentine I think is grossly underrated in the WWE history cycle. He's barely talked about, it seems like, and of course Steamboat was super over here. The match has classic work and storytelling. Somewhere along the way though, the finish ends up flat, as right in the middle of Steamboat's comeback to victory, he gets rolled up out of nowhere by Valentine, and the Hammer ends up stealing the victory. Number 86, Bobby Lashley versus Drew McIntyre, WrestleMania 37. After a worldwide pandemic took fans out of the arenas for over a year, WWE finally braved the strange and held WrestleMania 37 at the original holding place of WrestleMania 36, which was Tampa Bay, Florida. The shine was somewhat off, as it wasn't the first large event held after the pandemic. The Super Bowl was held in the very same building just a couple months prior, but WWE took their lead and only sold about half the stadium full of tickets, and the show was to open up with this Lashley McIntyre title match. Very memorable because for the first time ever, WrestleMania was rain delayed, which led to some great impromptu promos for about 30 minutes. So by the time this match hit the ring, needless to say, the world was watching. Many fans thought that Drew would finally get his WrestleMania moment in front of an audience, since the year before he had to win the title in front of no one. And a somewhat questionable booking decision, Lashley, the heel, was given the first win on this very important night. Sports gambling. Number 85, Money in the Bank, WrestleMania 23. By the time WrestleMania 23 rolled around, the Money in the Bank match as a concept, you could argue, was at its hottest point. The match this time around would be won by Mr. Kennedy, who was a hot commodity at this point, believe it or not. However, this win ended up being the beginning of the end for him, as he became the first man to foil the briefcase win, and this was due to a mix of injuries and backstage politics, and Kennedy sadly never quite recovered from it in his WWE career. The real ones still remember though. Number 84, the British Bulldogs versus the Dream Team, WrestleMania 2. The Bulldogs came into this match with Ozzy Osbourne in tow, which the jury is still out on if he even realized where he was at the time. This was another solid match carried by Greg Valentine's selling, and even though the finish was rather odd, this is one of the more watchable matches when you go back and revisit this WrestleMania 2 card, which we already established was not necessarily full of Matt classics. Number 83, Undertaker versus Diesel, WrestleMania 12. Big Daddy Cool was on his way out of the WWF in 1996, and this match was a decent match in execution. However, I'm going to talk about the build specifically here. WWE was always willing to go the extra mile to set up these Undertaker WrestleMania feuds, with a few exceptions, of course. This one I will always remember for the month before at the In Your House pay-per-view, when Undertaker pulled Diesel down under the ring, and then who could forget when Diesel was surprised with a replica dummy in a coffin. The match also also delivered, ending with an impressive tombstone delivered to the former center for the University of Tennessee. Number 82, Razor Ramon versus Jeff Jarrett, WrestleMania 11. Razor and Jarrett took this match all over the country, and by the time they made it to WrestleMania 11, they had it down to a science. This match also involves Jeff Jarrett's manager, the Roadie, aka the Road Dogg, who was also present, and he was flanked by the 1-2-3 Kid on the other side in Razor's corner. I thought it was interesting how Road Dogg made an omission on his podcast recently that he was doing tons of cocaine during this time, which puts a whole new spin on this match as I went back and watched it. This match was basically Double J versus Motley Crue, so they did all the best spots from their previous matches, and the match itself, I would say, was far too good to have been ruined by a DQ finish, but they would keep this thing going even farther beyond this WrestleMania 11. Number 81, Chris Jericho versus William Regal, WrestleMania 17. This was the opening match to what was perhaps looked at by many as the best WrestleMania from front to back, and this is remembered fondly because it also had a memorable setup. When Regal was the acting on-screen commissioner who drew the ire of Jericho, which in turn Jericho peed in his tea, and what ensued was pure comedy gold. This match really should be higher on my list, and perhaps it would be, but there is another Regal Mania match that I thought was slightly better. This one suffers a bit because Jericho was kind of getting a stop-start push, and fans didn't really know if they wanted to fully commit to him at this point. Number 80, Batista versus Triple H, WrestleMania 21. Some folks will trash this match as being a slow, long, and plodding type of affair. I'm not necessarily one of those people. I think they told a great story, and by comparison of John Cena's big title win over JBL at this same show, this match was the better of the two, I would say, which is not saying a whole lot, I guess. You can't deny the fact that both matches were the launching pads for both Cena and Batista to become the global superstars that they became for the next decade plus. Triple H got the color, and Batista was always one step ahead of Hunter and Flair, his former Evolution stablemates. The Los Angeles crowd was casual enough to enjoy just seeing another title switch and seeing the launch of Batista, even though the match was super long. Number 79, Kurt Angle and Ronda Rousey versus Triple H and Stephanie McMahon at WrestleMania 34. For all intents and purposes, I'd like to pretend in my mind that this is how Kurt Angle went out instead of the limpy match the next year with Baron Corbin. This match was a big deal, and depending on how you feel about Ronda and ultimately how her career ends up shaping out will determine how future generations are going to view this match. This was Ronda's big WWE in-ring debut, which had been anticipated for at least 3 years since she made that cameo appearance at WrestleMania 31. The match was put together very well and was very entertaining, even if it's not what some would consider a matte classic. You could also look at it as Triple H versus Angle one final time with some added bells and whistles. Number 78, Cody Rhodes versus Rey Mysterio, WrestleMania 27. Mania 27 has to be on the list of one of the more underwhelming WrestleMania shows as a whole. This match, however, was an undercard gem. In recent years, WWE have floundered the opportunity to have a big annual Rey Mysterio WrestleMania match, but this here shows that it could have been a thing, if not only as a way to transition some talent past their mid-card status, and that's exactly what Rey tried to do here for Cody. They had a solid match, not a show stealer by any means, but it should have shown the powers that be then that Cody could be a guy. Instead, he would soon be Stardust and, that whole rest of that story. Number 77, Money in the Bank Bank WrestleMania 24. Yet another Money in the Bank match here, but hey, how can you not put all these onto the list, really, when you break it all down? A spot fest it was year after year, but also guys would work very hard and put their careers on the line. Sometimes the results would vary, but you could always count on these matches year after year to be entertaining. You get the usual suspects here, guys like Shelton Benjamin, Jericho, John Morrison, Matt Hardy. These are all guys that would kind of be synonymous with the match over the years. And you also had your token mid-card guys at the time like MVP, CM Punk, Mr. Kennedy, and so forth. The only thing missing from this one was someone playing the big man role. CM Punk ends up winning it. I guess you could say this match was somewhat of his official WrestleMania launching pad. Number 76, Seth Rollins versus Randy Orton, WrestleMania 31. WrestleMania 31 was a fun show to experience live. I was there. Looking back on it though, it just ages rather badly. There's nothing really memorable about it on the whole besides the Seth Rollins cashing in the Money in the Bank briefcase during the main event. But in the undercard, he would wrestle Randy Orton and what had to have been the best match on the card from bell to bell. I say the actual card because it seems like there was a real good four-way tag match on the pre-show. Regardless, this match will forever be remembered as the awesome finish that saw Orton lift out of Rollins' stomp finisher and into an RKO. Number 75, Steve Austin versus Kevin Owens, WrestleMania 38. Still fresh in everyone's minds, this one should be, though I really shouldn't need to say much. After nearly 20 years without a proper WWE match, Stone Cold Steve Austin returned for what we have to presume was the very last time. Kevin Owens spent the better part of the beginning of 2022 by dissing the state of Texas, and we could all see where this was going as Owens laid out a challenge for Austin at WrestleMania, and Austin accepted. However, the WWE was very cautious about advertising this as an actual match. Instead, it was advertised as Austin as a guest on the Kevin Owens show, but they do end up having a match, albeit it was more of a brawl around the arena. Still, Austin moved very well for his age and his lack of ring time for the last 20 years, and even took a couple of solid bumps. Number 74, Matt Hardy versus Jeff Hardy, WrestleMania 25. You could argue this was peak Hardy Boys, especially Jeff, and the two of them finally got to live out a lifelong dream of wrestling each other at WrestleMania. This match was given an Extreme Rules gimmick, which made it to where Jeff could do his famous selling and stunts. The match was good, probably one of the better matches on this card. Still was missing something. It also just doesn't feel like a really big match for some reason, even though it was something that fans had wanted to see for over a decade. Number 73, Seth Rollins versus Triple H, WrestleMania 33. The old chestnut that is Triple H WrestleMania matches. It's kind of like Neil Diamond. You either love them or you hate them. For me, I think most of them are fine, with a couple exceptions, of course. This one falls into sort of a gray area with me, as it's a little lengthy and it's a non-title match, which runs close to 30 minutes. And this can usually be a death knell on a card like this, but depending on the spot, it can work. Still a better match from the show than the previously mentioned Brock versus Goldberg and Undertaker versus Roman, which I can tell you, you're not going to find on this list, brother. Number 72, Andre the Giant versus Jake the Snake Roberts, WrestleMania 5. It was another time, quite simply, but hey, for my money, this was a big deal match. WrestleMania 5 and the build to it is probably my earliest wrestling memory, and Jake the Snake was the man at this point. Big John Studd was the special guest referee, which harkens back to his slam match with Andre at WrestleMania 1. Andre did all of his classic giant spots like getting tied in the ropes. This match was fine, but it could have been a star-making performance for Jake. Instead, he ends up winning by DQ when Andre attacks John Studd, and Ted DiBiase shows up and embezzles all the money. Tries to steal Jake's snake. Number 71, Hulk Hogan versus Sid Justice, WrestleMania 8. Hulk matches matches, Sid matches, more of an acquired taste, I suppose. This match will forever be remembered as the time we could have gotten Flair versus Hogan at WrestleMania, but instead we got Justice versus Hogan and Flair versus Savage. And while the latter was definitely the superior match on the WrestleMania 8 card, pretty much your typical Hogan match here, but definitely relevant because this was the end of the true original run of Hulkamania, as Hulk was super over with the Indiana crowd. And even though the match ends with a DQ messed up finish and a late run-in from Papa Shango, the crowd did not care because the Ultimate Warrior. Number 70, Bianca Belair versus Becky Lynch, WrestleMania 38. This one, to me, was a pleasant surprise. The build to this match was done very well, and it really came off as a big deal. Becky had virtually stolen the title from Bianca 7 months earlier, and this led to Bianca's big title shot at WrestleMania. This would be the second year in a row for Bianca to get the big title win at the Show of Shows, and the match was a pretty solid piece of work. It's not every day in WWE that you get a 7-month build to a match that pays off in expectations in the ring, but kudos to everyone involved here, because you could have an argument that this was the best match on the WrestleMania 38 Night 1 card. Of course, we're talking from a technical perspective. Number 69, John Cena versus The Big Show, WrestleMania 20. Quick match that opened the WrestleMania during its 20th edition, and while not a marvel by any means, this was the absolute beginning of what would be an incredible resume of WrestleMania battles that John Cena would embark on during his career. So far, there's really not much else to say about it besides the fact that when the Madison Square Garden crowd went nuts for Cena's US title win, I bet Vince McMahon could hear the cash registers just a chinging in his head, pal. Number 68, Roddy Piper versus Goldust, WrestleMania 12. What the hell is a backlot brawl? My 12-year-old self said to myself. I imagine many felt the same way. We would all come to find out that it was perhaps the very first cinematic match in WrestleMania history, and that's basically why it appears on the countdown here at the very least. Roddy Piper beats the ever-loving daylights out of Goldust in a pre-taped brawl and a back alleyway, which leads to Goldust attempting vehicular manslaughter and fleeing the scene. Throughout the show, they would cut to air quotes live footage of their high-speed chase, which was just stock footage of the O.J. Simpson car chase that you absolutely had to live in that time just to believe that it was all over the news. Eventually, it ends with the two showing up at the Anaheim Pond for the event, and the match itself ends really awkwardly with Piper removing Goldust's costume and revealing a negligee. Also, in hindsight, the optics on this are weird for, well, reasons. Number 67, Diesel versus Shawn Michaels, WrestleMania 11. Not often does a heel challenger come into WrestleMania, but that's what happened here. Diesel was in the middle of his, well, middling title run. Knowing what we know about the Clique in hindsight, they probably could not have been happy about playing second fiddle to the Lawrence Taylor main event. And prior to this show, only WrestleManias 1 and 8 did not feature world title main events, and overall this is still a very rare sight. Situations being what they are, still these two put together a solid contest, but definitely suffered because Diesel was kind of a lame duck as champion, and fans were wanting to cheer Shawn here, but soon enough he would turn babyface, and well, we'll get to that later. Number 66, Roman Reigns versus Daniel Bryan versus Edge, WrestleMania 37. Rack another one up for the Roman Reigns WrestleMania resume. This time his dance partners would be Daniel Bryan and Edge. While both challengers were beloved characters, neither Edge or Bryan felt like the right person to get this win here. Still, with a triple threat match, you are able able to do exciting things, where wrestlers pair off and switch back and forth. And honestly, this is up there as far as Roman's WrestleMania matches go. And I'm not trying to be a Roman hater when I say that. Number 65, Ted DiBiase versus Jake Roberts, WrestleMania 6. This match was built around DiBiase's $1 million championship, which may have not been prestigious in any traditional way, but it was made of freaking diamonds. This was some of Jake's best stuff, and arguably he was at one of his most over points here. I know he was way over at the WrestleMania before this as well, but you could argue that it was here too. Also, this is somewhat of kind of the beginning of the end of Jake's big run for DiBiase, as he was just a couple years removed from the main event of Mania 4 and was settling into the mid-card heel gatekeeper role. The belt was made of freaking diamonds, okay? These guys worked so hard, and the match was way too good to end in a DQ finish. And geez, it seems like that's every Jake the Snake Roberts WrestleMania match. Jake just could not catch a break. He gets beat by Honky at Mania 3. Mania 4, he goes to a time limit draw with Rude. Mania 5, he beats Andre, but it's a flat DQ that did absolutely nothing for him. And here, he loses via countout. At least Jake went over in the blindfold match, but hey, it was the freaking blindfold match. Number 64, Hulk Hogan versus Sergeant Slaughter, WrestleMania 7. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. This one's kind of controversial, sensitive subject matter due to the Iraqi sympathizer gimmick held by Sergeant Slaughter. Also, fans remember this as the main event that was moved from the LA Coliseum to the sports arena. WWE attests that this was due to security measures. Others believe it was due to ticket sale issues. Whatever the case is, this is not the video for that debate. This is another one of your typical Hogan matches. While not one of the better ones, and while the show didn't generate many buys, I don't know. I just know it should go right about here. Number 63, AJ Styles versus Shane McMahon, WrestleMania 33. Shane O'Mac returned at WrestleMania 32 as a shock to pretty much everyone to take the coveted WrestleMania Undertaker match for that year. That match was better than it had any business being, but we are here to talk about how Shane O'Mac followed that up, and that was working this match with AJ Styles. Some fans would have preferred a different AJ opponent that year, but Shane and AJ ended up having a really great match, and if anything, it should be considered a high honor for AJ to be able to carry a big time match with the boss's son. Number 62, Rob Van Dam versus William Regal, WrestleMania 18. The quick opening match from WrestleMania X8. The crowd was hot for this and ready to be on board with a huge win by Van Dam. WWE had trusted Regal with this spot the year prior with he and Jericho, and while it's apples and oranges, I prefer this one. Maybe because it's Van Dam, maybe it was the Canadian crowd, who knows? Van Dam gets the big win for the IC title, and this would famously be the last Intercontinental title match at a WrestleMania for over a decade after that, which is an interesting bit of trivia. Number 61, Rey Mysterio versus Kurt Angle versus Randy Orton, WrestleMania 22. The World Heavyweight title match for Mania 22. This was an inspirational journey for Rey Mysterio. Having just lost his best friend Eddie Guerrero months prior, Rey was positioned to win the Royal Rumble in 2006 and press on to a huge WrestleMania title win, which led to his first and maybe only proper run as champion, as his later run seemed more transitional. But that's besides the point. This match was awesome. Really wanted to rate it higher, but as we get closer and closer, it's getting, well, Close. Number 60, The Rock versus John Cena, WrestleMania 29. The Rock returned to WWE action in 2011, which led to a huge showdown with John Cena at WrestleMania 28. WWE then did something quite unprecedented by basically announcing that there would be a rematch at the next year's show. Sure enough, by the time Royal Rumble 2013 rolled around, Rock was ready to come in and do his stuff, but there was just one problem. A new star had been made in CM Punk, and Punk, who had been arguably carrying the company that whole year prior, was not happy about being put on the back burner to The Rock. Punk lobbied for a triple threat match with Cena and The Rock, but at the end of the day, Punk loses the title to The Rock at the Rumble, and this set up the huge rematch at WrestleMania 29. Cena and The Rock would go at it once again, while Punk got a match with The Undertaker instead, and Rock and Cena have a solid match here, but it suffered because Rock ended up with an injury, so he struggled through most of it, and Cena gets the win here. And I can tell you, since I was there live, the MetLife Stadium crowd treated this like mild mozzarella cheese, and as stated brilliantly by a fellow fan in the parking lot afterwards, I've seen enough of them. Number 59, Charlotte versus Asuka, WrestleMania 34. WrestleMania 34, the stage was set between Asuka and Charlotte. The story was a classic heel-face build that seemed primed for Asuka to win her first main roster title. Although that was not to be, Charlotte ends up going over, and even though that seemed strange to me and sort of anticlimactic at the time, I can still go back and really enjoy this match in hindsight, because it is 2020 after all, or 2022. Either way, Asuka ended up just fine. Just go back and watch it. Pretty good. Number 58, AJ Styles versus Chris Jericho, WrestleMania 32. After what seemed like an eternity, AJ Styles finally made his way to the WWE in 2016. After a huge debut at the Royal Rumble that January, AJ kept the momentum going and got booked right into a WrestleMania feud with Chris Jericho. The opening moments of this match, you can see that AJ is just in awe of finally working a huge WrestleMania. The two have one of the better undercard Mania matches you'll ever see, as they worked a main event match in the lower card, kicking out of each other's finishers. It ends with an awesome spot of Jericho countering the phenomenal forearm into a code breaker for the win. Number 57, Rey Mysterio versus Eddie Guerrero, WrestleMania 21. The year was 2005, and this feud would go on to some weird stages later on. Also would last what literally seemed years, and I mean that in the nicest way possible. At this point though, doesn't really matter what was happening in the feud at the time, because these two would work together for years, and at this point, you know what you were getting whenever you put them in there together. You just can't help having the magic happen. They worked very hard, but just as they were getting going, we got a surprise win finish by Rey. Knowing that this is merely the beginning of the story though, sometimes at WrestleMania it's just the beginning instead of the climactic end. Number 56, CM Punk versus Randy Orton, WrestleMania 27. WrestleMania 27 has a reputation of being bad. Overall, not very memorable, but there are a couple gems here you can find, and this one is a favorite of mine. Randy Orton is at his best when he lets someone else that's good basically have their match, and that's what happened here. Punk was a great heel at the time, and even though he was in that weird new Nexus stage of his career, months later though, it would be the summer of Punk. This match had to have shown the powers that be quite a bit, and Punk gets caught with an RKO out of nowhere, and Orton is victorious. Number 55, Randy Savage versus Ted DiBiase, WrestleMania 4. WrestleMania 4 didn't really set the pay-per-view world on fire, as the format of the one-night tournament was risky. Couple that with the fact that we got a break from Hulkamania, even though we really didn't need one yet, and this showed the world that Vince McMahon felt like he could do the Hulk formula with anyone. And while Savage was super over at this time, he wasn't quite Hulkamania, And that's all neither here nor there though, as Savage and DiBiase had a really good match to close out the WrestleMania 4 show. Savage, of course, was victorious and leaves triumphant with his girl and his best friend in tow. Things just would have stayed that simple for the Macho Man. Number 54, Hulk Hogan and Mr. T versus Piper and Orndorff for WrestleMania 1. Well, hey, it had to appear somewhere, right? The main event of the first WrestleMania. What else can you say? This, of course, set the stage for everything. The huge wrestling boom of the 80s that was spearheaded by Hulkamania and WrestleMania concurrently. Perhaps the most underrated tag team of all time. This match won't impress the purists out there, but you can never deny the huge heat that Piper and company had. You couple all of that with the presentation, the lights and the glitz and the glamour for 1985, of course. Perhaps no other match is more important in WrestleMania history. Number 53, Undertaker versus Kane, WrestleMania 14. There's no time like the first time, and this would be the first of many, many battles between the Undertaker and Kane. The first time though, well, that was special. This match was built for almost a year between the first mention of Kane by Paul Bearer up to his debut at Bad Blood 1997, and then from there, the match built another 5 months before the two would finally face off here. Amazingly, Kane would stick around for 20 plus years instead of fading into obscurity like most of Taker's Mania opponents had been up until that time. Number 52, Chris Jericho versus Chris Benoit versus Kurt Angle, WrestleMania 2000. As far as I can tell, this was the first three-way match in WrestleMania history. This also had a nifty gimmick behind it, as the match featured both the Intercontinental Champion and the European Champion, with each fall being held for each of the titles. This effectively got both titles off of Angle. Just judging by the participants, this match could have been a lot better and was messy in parts. Nonetheless, as mentioned, it's very historic, and you just can't argue with the performers that are in it. Number 51, Kofi Kingston versus Daniel Bryan, WrestleMania 35. Every now and then, something just seems right. And if it's really, really right, then the WWE fans, or the universe rather, will basically will it into existence. We really saw this first back at WrestleMania 30 with Daniel Bryan, so how fitting was it that he be on the other side of the coin when it happened again just a few years later here with Kofi Kingston. The WWE universe pushed, Vince and the powers that be listened, and sure enough, Kofi Mania was in full swing. The momentum would ride all the way into the summer. They have a dang fine match here. For a title match though, and the participants being who they were, it should have been just a little bit better. I blame the aesthetic that Bryan was just not being accepted as a heel at the time. The two made the best out of it though. Number 50, John Cena versus Triple H, WrestleMania 22. Cena wins the US title at Mania 20 and then follows that up by winning the WWE Championship at WrestleMania 21. Then naturally he had to have the Triple H feud. Cena was dominating in the title picture and had even came in as the champion and ends up retaining the title, which is something that is super rare when it comes to WrestleMania main event title matches. It's pretty much expected every year for a big change to happen, so this made for a weird dynamic, as there was some pushback against Cena by the fans in these days. Also, these same fans didn't have much love for Triple H at the time either. Either way, this was also the very last WrestleMania to ever be held in a normal arena, at least as of press time, which is also a fun fact. Number 49, Becky Lynch versus Charlotte Flair versus Ronda Rousey, WrestleMania 35. This match was special. Don't believe me? Just ask WWE and they will tell you until the point of exhaustion that this was the first ever WrestleMania headlined by a women's match. Now, we've definitely come a long way since the Moolah days, or heck, even the days of Alundra Blaze. The setup was nearly perfect. You have two very qualified hard workers like Becky and Charlotte carry a match with someone that had the outside star power of a Ronda Rousey. WWE was very brilliant here because not only did mainstream media eat up the hugeness of the event for women's wrestling, the high profile of Ronda also added to it. The match itself also delivered. Rough around the edges, yes, but with all things considered, this match here I think is in a very, very good spot. Number 48, Shane McMahon versus Vince McMahon, WrestleMania 17. WrestleMania 17 had it all, and it is widely regarded as being quite possibly the best show in the history of the show of shows. This match was better than it had any business being, and to tell you the truth, it was the combination of everything. The storyline build literally dominated WWF TV in the lead up. Even though Rock and Austin was the main event, this match had the most build as far as the tale being unfolded of Vince McMahon being drunk with power and having an affair with Trish Stratus. All the while, his wife Linda was in a comatose state, and Shane McMahon defends the honor of the family and his mother and pretty much real life for the last 20 years, am I right? Anyway, they had a street fight where Vince and Shane were able to just garbage the heck out of this thing, but it was so damn entertaining. You get Linda also finally waking up from said coma. You get the first ever coast to coast done by Shane McMahon. It's just awesome. As I write this, I think, dang, this should have been maybe a little bit higher. Number 47, Eddie Guerrero versus Kurt Angle, WrestleMania 20. WrestleMania 20 is just forever to be remembered as the time where Eddie and name redacted ruled the WWE. Just 4 years after debuting as part of the Radicals leaving WCW, Eddie and Benoit were at the top of the card, winning titles and doing gangsta stuff. Eddie and Kurt have a heck of a match here. They go over 20 minutes, and who can forget the spot with Eddie Guerrero's boot coming off and the ankle lock? That finish is still copied on WWE TV to this day. Call it something of a tribute. This match deserves to be in with the best of the best. Number 46, the Money in the Bank match, WrestleMania 25. Oh boy, it's been a minute since we had one of these in here, and this match was 14 minutes of pure spots and comedy. To be honest, the involvement of Swoggle here is one of the things that sets this one apart for me from most. Kofi in there doing his thing, Kane does the big man stuff. This one is won by CM Punk for a second year in a row. Man, they just couldn't find anything else to do with him at this point besides just give him that briefcase. Punk would jump these hoops for years until he finally got his real chance, I guess you could say. Number 45, Hulk Hogan versus Vince McMahon, WrestleMania 19. McMahon took WrestleMania 18 off, but was back to have a match at WrestleMania 19, and this time it would be against Hulk Hogan. McMahon pulled out all the stops, if you will, and when this was done, Vince was left a bloody mess by Hogan. If you enjoy the occasional garbage match, which I am known to, well, this one is a fun one to go back and watch. The match was very surreal to see. Hulkamania face to face with his creator, doing battle on the grand stage paved by both men. You just can't tell a more epic WrestleMania story than that. The match also pretty much stole the show on what was a meh WrestleMania 19 card for the most part. Number 44, Ultimate Warrior versus Randy Savage, WrestleMania 7. WrestleMania 7 was a disaster, inside and out. McMahon played a dangerous game, hedging his bets on this Hogan versus Sergeant Slaughter patriotic storyline. The show was famously moved from the LA Coliseum to the sports arena for reasons still argued over to this day. WWE maintains it was for security measures. Others believe it was because tickets weren't exactly flying out the door. Either way, Warrior was just 1 year removed from being the biggest new star when he pinned Hogan at WrestleMania 6, and Savage was of course on his way out as a regular performer and was at the end of his huge heel run. They put the added gimmick of this being a retirement match. Warrior goes over here because theoretically he had a lot more left in the tank. Savage turns face after the match and reunites with Miss Elizabeth, and Randy goes off into the sunset, but not really, of course. Number 43, Undertaker versus Batista, WrestleMania 23. The WWE eggs were firmly in the basket of Batista and John Cena at this point in 2007, just 2 years removed from both men's big title wins at WrestleMania 21. Both had returned to the main event matches here. Now, Batista was not present at Mania 22, but returned here and had a heck of a match with The Undertaker. Taker had spent his WrestleMania 22 himself working with Mark Henry, which was one of the more forgettable years of Taker's streak. The two got 15 minutes here, and the match was positioned more towards the middle of the card. However, I think the time enhances the match in a way, as I don't think the match would have been as good at 23 minutes. You see what I'm getting at? Number 42, Charlotte Flair versus Sasha Banks versus Becky Lynch, WrestleMania 32. Mania 32 was a weird year. A lot of misses on the card, but this one was great. The girls got around 15 minutes to tell their story, and in hindsight, this one probably could have done the first Women's Mania main event gimmick. Anyway, all that aside, this helped set the stage for all of that and showed people that quite possibly the women could main event and could have matches on par and even better in some cases than what most, if not all of the men were doing at that time. Charlotte wins and becomes the first women's champion, and the Divas era was officially over. Number 41, Shawn Michaels versus Vince McMahon, WrestleMania 22. At this point, it was almost like, well, who gets the Vince match every few years? Essentially, the WWE pulled out the exact same story that Vince had done just a few years prior with Hogan, and then they went ahead and they did it again here and just tried to top it. So we have yet another annual Vince McMahon WrestleMania street fight. This one was probably the best of them all, I would say. Shawn pulls out all the stops here. The huge elbow off the ladder is still in all the WrestleMania video packages, it seems. Shawn kicks the heck out of Vince so bad that we wouldn't see him again in a Mania match until WrestleMania 26, which is omitted from this countdown, obviously. Number 40, The Rock versus John Cena, WrestleMania 28. This match should have achieved much more. In any event, the match was 30 minutes and dragged on just a bit too long. It's like they just gave them and The Undertaker match each 30 minutes and just filled the show with the rest of the stuff. Generationally, though, this was absolutely amazing to see. There was a point in time where we wondered if Rock would ever come back, and next thing you know, he's teaming with Cena at Survivor Series and then setting up this program that would technically last over a year and span through 2 different WrestleManias. Number 39, The Rock versus Stone Cold Steve Austin, WrestleMania 19. The Rock and Austin WrestleMania trilogy unfortunately ended with more of a whimper than a bang. It may be difficult to watch in hindsight, knowing what Austin was going through going into this one. Austin was hospitalized the night prior with panic attacks and ended up wrestling the match against serious doctor's orders due to the condition of his neck. Knowing that, though, will always make this match the stuff of legends, even though you could technically say Austin returned to the ring in 2022. This, for all intents and purposes, is the final chapter, and anything else is just an addendum. Number 38, AJ Styles versus Shinsuke Nakamura, WrestleMania 34. The fact that this match happened at a WrestleMania is just astounding. Who would have thought a guy like AJ Styles, who journeyed for years through every other promotion besides WWE, he literally debuts and within 2 years was now placed in a huge spot on the grand stage. Also flipped that for Nakamura as well, who was given this huge opportunity and seemed to be on the path to getting the huge title win. For whatever reason, the brakes were pumped on all of that, and what resulted was an odd match, but still great, still top 40, still deserves to be marveled for the achievement that it was for both superstars. Number 37, Undertaker versus AJ Styles, WrestleMania 36. Worldwide panic had set in before this WrestleMania, WrestleMania got off the rails, and what resulted was a very odd collection of matches presented in front of no fans. However, WWE took the opportunity to get creative and go cinematic with a couple matches on this card, the better of the two being what was billed as a boneyard match, a match that had never been seen before, so mystique was abundant, and what transpired would change both sports and cinema forever. No, not really, but it was still very, very good. For the most part, this match was the only saving grace on this card. This was, for all intents and purposes, Undertaker's farewell, even though he hasn't ruled out doing something similar to this down the road. Number 36, Hulk Hogan versus Randy Savage, WrestleMania 5. It's a tale as old as time. The jealous partner in friendship or in love. Sometimes some people are just doomed. Now, of course, that's the story beneath the surface for Macho Man versus Hulk Hogan. They were the mega powers. Nothing could stop them together except for jealousy over a woman. Randy thinks Hogan is going to boink Miss Elizabeth, and not to mention leaves him high and dry during a tag team match. So of course Randy ends up blowing his top just a little, and the mega powers exploded. This moved Macho to a heel, and he would drop the title to Hogan to end his year-long experiment as being the head of the table, a dynamic that Savage would arguably battle within himself for the rest of his life. Wow, man, that's deep. Number 35, Undertaker versus Triple H, WrestleMania 17. The start of what would end up being a trilogy of WrestleMania matches between these two. After Taker missed Mania 2000, he was featured here in his American Badass gimmick, but this was a precursor to the type of singles matches that would really make the WrestleMania streak and take it to a whole other level. Of course, the Mania 17 card was stacked to begin with, so this one kind of gets lost in the shuffle. Of the three, this one is ranked the lowest. Foreshadowing. Number 34, Brock Lesnar versus Kurt Angle, WrestleMania 19. A young Brock Lesnar battles a seasoned Kurt Angle in the main event of the only WrestleMania to ever be held in Seattle, and it still holds records apparently to this day. You can't get anything more legit than this when you think about the gold medalist wrestler against the national champion wrestler. Many could say that this match ushered in a new era of legitimacy to the grand stage. This would be as good as it would get for Brock for a while, and Kurt, much like Stone Cold Steve Austin that same night, was also in very rough shape heading into this match. This wouldn't be the end for Kurt though, as he would get experimental surgery and keep wrestling for years. Most remember Brock's botched shooting star press at the end. Be that as it may, the match was still phenomenal. Number 33, Undertaker versus CM Punk, WrestleMania 29. CM Punk finally became the main event player he knew he could be in the summer of 2011, carrying that momentum into 2012, and by his account was promised year after year to be the one that truly headlined WrestleMania. 2013 came around and Punk was the champion, and for whatever reason believed that he would somehow get that opportunity at WrestleMania 29. As covered though earlier, that was not to be, and instead that went to the Cena versus Rock rematch. From there though, Punk did get to work with Undertaker, and by most accounts, the two ended up with the way better storyline heading in and ended up having the way better match as well. Number 32, Edge and Christian versus the Hardy Boys versus the Dudley Boys, WrestleMania 2000. Tables, ladders, and chairs. Before, it was tables, ladders, and chairs. These three teams would battle many times throughout the years, but they all made each other famous during this match, and it sort of speaks for itself. It's a car crash, yes, but you just can't look away. Edge and Christian get the win and the titles, but everyone was a winner here, as this made everyone's career as stated and deserves to be high on the list and a story. Number 31, Shawn Michaels versus Ric Flair, WrestleMania 24. Inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame the night before, there was perhaps no greater retirement angle in the history of wrestling, at least during my lifetime, and regardless of how Flair has kind of tarnished it since then, you cannot argue with the drama and storytelling that was brought out during this match. The classic I love you, I'm sorry, while meme-worthy content in recent years hit the home plate the hardest. The match, even though it was a tad rough around the edges, still told an amazing story. The Nature Boy was able to do the things one more time. This is amazing to go back and watch. Number 30, Cody Rhodes versus Seth Rollins, WrestleMania 38. I know that it just happened. Some may say that it's too soon for a match like this that happened so recently, and how it could claim such a prestigious spot on the list. However, I am fairly confident that this match will hold up and be talked about fondly for years to come. There are a lot of intricacies here that led to this match, but the main story, of course, surrounds the exodus of Cody Rhodes from AEW back to WWE. And while it wasn't a surprise to many as word had gotten out, it was still surreal to see Cody return as the American Nightmare. The match, well, it speaks for itself. These two had what many considered the match of the night, if not the whole weekend of WrestleMania 38. Number 29, Stone Cold Steve Austin versus The Rock, WrestleMania 15. The pinnacle of the Attitude Era. This WrestleMania embodies that era, even if from a bell-to-bell perspective, it's not the greatest card overall. But you cannot deny the main event here being the first major Rock Austin World Championship match. And even though the two had worked many times when they were still in the mid-card, this match was technically built the moment that The Rock turned heel at Survivor Series 1998. Some may say the match was an overbooked Vince Russo mess, and while that may technically be true, it's also true that this was the biggest match on the biggest show for a company that was absolutely bulletproof, bullet train in the year 1999. Number 28, Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior, WrestleMania 6. Hulk Hogan had taken the wrestling biz to arguably its greatest heights in the heart of the 80s, and well, here we were in 1990. As always in entertainment, the thought is always about what's next. Vince McMahon had those same thoughts during this time and was set for his second biggest act to overtake his first. Here we enter the Ultimate Warrior. Warrior was ascending in popularity, and he and Hogan were set in what would be the first ever good guy versus good guy WrestleMania main event. It actually kind of backfired in a way, kind of split the audience, and while the attendance was great, pay-per-view buys weren't quite what Vince would have expected. The match itself, though, is better than any other Warrior match that's out there. This match, you can say, was the end of the innocence for the 1980s wrestling boom. Number 27, Bret the Hitman Hart versus Roddy Piper, WrestleMania 8. In 1991, the Hart Foundation would come to an end, and Bret Hart would begin his remarkable singles run. His first big stop was SummerSlam 91 with Mr. Perfect, and then the next stop was this classic with Piper. This match had an interesting build as Piper turned into something of a tweener, and most sensed a heel turn in this process. But in the match, Piper finds himself conflicted presented with an opportunity to cheat during the match. Also, the awesome finish where Bret pinned Piper while bouncing off the ropes in a sleeper hold. Absolute thing of beauty. Number 26, Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Shawn Michaels, WrestleMania 14. The official launch into the stratosphere for Austin 316. Shawn Michaels himself was such a polarizing figure at this time, and sadly was on his way out for the next 4 years. Shawn somehow musters everything he has, fight through the pain of a bad back injury, pull off this match. Just another wrestler and performer making the ultimate sacrifice of their body for the company, for the fans, and maybe for the money as well. But hey, that's a talk for a whole other day. Because Stone Cold said so. Number 25, John Cena versus Shawn Michaels, WrestleMania 23. Speaking of Shawn Michaels, he and John Cena have quite the WrestleMania resume, so it's only natural that the two would meet and have a pretty dang good WrestleMania match. This one is kind of a sleeper in a lot of ways. Not many people talk about it for whatever reason. I guess this show, when it's talked about, the Donald Trump involvement is more the talking point. Nevertheless, the build-up was so-so, as it was a classic tag team partner split-up angle, and the two hadn't even really been a tag team for that long. The match does suffer from crowd confusion due to Shawn's quick heel turn, and of course the never-ending resistance shown to John Cena. Given that most Cena matches would happen under these circumstances though, that makes this all the more watchable, possibly of the whole Cena collection, and that's why it's here. Number 24, Undertaker vs. Edge, WrestleMania 24. Mania 24 was a fun show, and while the buzz was all about Ric Flair's retirement, this match, for all intents and purposes, was the best match on that show. Undertaker was really coming into his own here for the back end of his run, and Edge, you can say, was in his prime here as well, as at this point, Edge was about 3 years deep into his main event heel run, and Taker defeats Edge and keeps the streak alive for another year. It's hard to say that anyone that got to work with Taker though at a WrestleMania was anything but a loser. Number 23, Undertaker vs. Triple H, WrestleMania 27. The second match of the Taker-Hunter Mania trilogy. Taker had just come off of a pair of all-time battles with Shawn Michaels, so the expectations were high for this one. I myself wrote this match off and thought it had no chance of living up to the Taker's previous two Mania matches. These matches, while I don't think they're better than the Shawn matches, they're still right up there. What sets them apart is the physicality, and this was good, but they took it to a whole nother level with number 22, Undertaker vs. Triple H, WrestleMania 28. The previous match went so well, they figured, hey, what the hell? Let's do it again in Hell in a Cell, shall we? Let's also throw in Shawn Michaels as the special referee, which was an interesting ad given the connection between HBK and Hunter, but it made sense. Shawn gave a sense that maybe he was jealous of Hunter if he could do what he couldn't do and defeat Undertaker's streak. This left Shawn at the crux of the situation, planted firmly in the middle of a tough decision as to whether to call this thing down the middle. Add in all the bells and whistles and you have a match that I believe topped their previous encounter, and the men themselves would embrace afterwards and consider this the end of an era, whatever that means, since Trips and Taker kept at it for years afterwards, and Shawn Michaels himself even came out of retirement years later. Number 21, Edge vs. Mick Foley, WrestleMania 22. Mick Foley has an unbelievable resume of great matches. That's why it's weird that his WrestleMania track record isn't the most awesome. In fact, this match is pretty much his only in the countdown, and be that as it may, what a great match to have in there and to almost crack the top 20. This match, of course, was aided by the use of many gimmicks, including blood and fire, but you'd be missing a chance to say that perhaps this is one of the most brutal matches in the history of the show of shows. A thrill ride from beginning to end. Hey, I think I saw that on the back of a movie once. Number 20, Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker, WrestleMania 26. Well, here we go. Let the hockey fight start, I suppose. Undertaker and Shawn Michaels had an absolutely great all-time match at WrestleMania 25. More on that later. A sequel was in store for the next year, but this time, Shawn put his career on the line, and the match was sold as a career versus streak match, which headlined WrestleMania 26. Many fans like myself were conflicted because it just didn't seem like it was time for Shawn to retire. And the streak, well, it was just inconceivable that WWE would end it, especially to Shawn, who had a chance the year prior. Anyway, the two have another all-timer here, but hot take, wasn't even the best match on this Mania, and definitely didn't top the Mania 25 match. Great match, odd finish, and hey, speaking of the streak, it had to end sometime, right? Number 19, Brock Lesnar versus Undertaker, WrestleMania WrestleMania 30. All good things must come to an end, as they say, and The Undertaker's WrestleMania streak came to an abrupt halt at Mania 30, much to the shock of, well, everyone. Brock and Taker beat the absolute tar out of each other here. Now, the story goes that Brock knocked Taker out early in the match, and Taker holds up the story that he wrestled this match completely out of it, and also claims he remembers nothing of it. When the streak ended, oddly enough, a lot of the mystique had vanished of Taker's Mania matches. Brock Lesnar. Number 18, Chris Benoit versus Shawn Michaels versus Triple H, WrestleMania 20. Chris Benoit had to work harder than perhaps anyone in the history of the wrestling business to get to the top. WrestleMania 20 was a culmination of all that work. The first time ever that a triple threat would headline a WrestleMania, and the MSG crowd almost blew the roof off of the place the moment that Triple H tapped out to the crippler crossface. Blood, sweat, and tears were shed. It was a great moment that sadly is now all but erased from history due to the actions of the man involved. It's hard to celebrate it knowing how it all ends, but it deserves to be in the top 20 here. That's about all I can say about it for now. Number 17, Bret Hart versus Owen Hart, WrestleMania 10. Speaking of MSG WrestleManias, the show of shows returned to the world's most famous arena for a second time in 1994 for WrestleMania 10, and the first and only time in history the title was defended by the same man twice in one night. That man was the seemingly unstoppable Yokozuna. The situation formulated when both Bret Hart and Lex Luger became co-winners of the 1994 Rumble, and therefore the decision was made to have Yokozuna have two separate WrestleMania title matches. So there was a coin toss of doom that Lex Luger won, so he would get first dibs at Yoko. So Yokozuna and Luger would face each other first. That meant that whoever won would have to take on Bret later in the night. So this meant that Bret Hart would need to have a warm-up match to make things fair. Just know that the Hart brothers kicked off the Mania 10 show with a banger that was definitely the best non-gimmick match on that card. Number 16, John Cena versus Batista, WrestleMania 26. Their paths to greatness were parallel, and many wondered through the 2000s first decade who would win in a showdown between the two flagship performers. A clash was built to happen on the grand stage here of WrestleMania 26 in Arizona, which, fun fact, is the only WrestleMania to ever take place in that state. Well, the two did not disappoint and ended up having what I believe was the tops of that card. Batista and Cena had a very hard-hitting and big move match that really could have been won by either guy. In the end, though, Cena was the franchise, so he takes it home and sends the C-Nation home happy. Number 15, Undertaker versus Ric Flair, WrestleMania 18. Mania 18 was pretty epic, being as that it was the first real Mania after the big buyout of WCW. Even though technically it was the year prior, this was the first year that we would see key WCW stars like Ric Flair, the NWO, and so on. And yes, I know they had all been there before, but that's besides the point. Flair's confidence was shaken from his last years in the Ted Turner Company. This match, you could probably say, was the first step taken into him gaining that confidence back, even though that wouldn't fully come around, he says, until he started rolling with Triple H and Evolution. This match is very similar to the match that Taker did at Mania 17 with Triple H. It actually ranks higher, though, just for the sheer name value and epicness of such a clash between the Taker and Ric Flair. Number 14, Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant, WrestleMania 3. Look, not a technical masterpiece, I know. However, you could say and you could paint a picture that this was perhaps the most important match in WrestleMania history. Yes, Mania 1 was important, of course, but Hogan versus Andre and the jam-packed Pontiac Silverdome, this match is what really turned Mania from WWE's biggest show of the year to something truly culturally iconic. Defining the term great can mean a lot of things. This match is great because because it is basically the cornerstone of WWE lore and of course WrestleMania in of itself. And in fact, I'll go as far to say that without this important match, we may not be enjoying the big event on the yearly to this day. Number 13, Shawn Michaels versus Chris Jericho, WrestleMania 19. Jericho was a year removed from headlining the grand stage against Triple H, and Shawn, well, he had been away since WrestleMania 14, and Shawn Michaels, as we knew it, we all thought he was done, but miraculously, the Lord healed his back, and he was able to return to the squared circle in 2002, but this would be his first WrestleMania since returning. Their match was pushed down to the mid-card on what was definitely a packed Mania 19 show. Shawn and Jericho told a great story about Jericho facing one of his one-time heroes, who he didn't look to as a hero anymore, and Jericho's heel brilliance is on full display, even down to the post-match fake handshake. Something so simple. Shawn gets the win, but Jericho gets the evil last laugh. It's just awesome. Number 12, Randy Savage versus Ric Flair, WrestleMania 8. Blood made its main event debut at WrestleMania 7 with Hulk Hogan and Sergeant Slaughter, and Blood would make its glorious return to a Mania main event here. The thing you could count on with early WrestleManias was the main event story would be intriguing, and this did not disappoint. Ric Flair had won the title at Royal Rumble 1992, and he decided that he didn't just want that trophy, he wanted Miss Elizabeth, so he reveals these pictures of him with Miss Elizabeth, which I suppose she claimed were doctored, and the match was bumped to a semi-main in favor of Hogan and Sid, and most fans and in wrestling lore, the match was supposed to be Hogan versus Flair, even though they tried out Hogan and Flair at house shows, and it wasn't that big of a draw. Did I cover everything there? Savage wins. Number 11, Kurt Angle versus Chris Benoit, WrestleMania 17. And anyway, wasn't Kurt Angle great here? And that other guy. Both men felt like they had something to prove. They showcased everything that made them arguably the two best technical wrestlers on the WWE roster, if not the entire world. Both men would go on to greater heights, but sometimes the ascent is much better than the peak. You know, kind of like climbing a mountain. Number 10, Daniel Bryan versus Randy Orton versus Batista, WrestleMania 30. For years, WWE management, i.e. Vince McMahon, had somewhat of a reputation of being slightly tone deaf and or stubborn towards what his audience would be telling him, and you could look no further than the story of Daniel Bryan to be exhibit A of that. Bryan had a cult following the moment he stepped into the WWE, and you could say that for whatever reason that hindered him in the early years. Despite his massive fan support, he would keep gaining momentum just to seemingly have it squandered. So when we get to Royal Rumble 2014, there was so much momentum built up around Daniel Bryan that he seemed like a shoe-in as the Rumble winner. Instead, he was left out of the match completely, and when the buzzer sounded for number 30 to enter, an unsuspecting Rey Mysterio was showered with boos, and Batista ends up winning the match to even more boos. Imagine this. That still wasn't enough to change course. It literally took a few hijackings from the crowd to get WWE to reconsider along the way at some point. From there, it was a true underdog story, the deck seemingly constantly stacked against Daniel Bryan. Even going into the match itself, Bryan had to go through Triple H earlier in the night to even get to the match in the main event. From there, he was a broken man who somehow, someway persevered. Daniel Bryan makes Batista tap and gave everyone the happy ending. Now what happened with the title run after that is a completely different story. Number 9, TLC 2, WrestleMania 17. Edge and Christian, the Hardys, and the Dudley Boys. Pretty much enough said. But Mania 17 had it all, didn't it? These 6 men did basically the same match the year before, and then a rematch at SummerSlam 2000, which was the match that was officially branded as Tables, Ladders, and Chairs. And these guys topped the Mania match with that one, so you could just imagine how high the stakes were going into this match. It's amazing these guys came out alive, because as mentioned ad nauseum, the bar was definitely set very, very high. Edge match has even been quoted several times as saying that maybe the bar was set too high. Knowing all of that though, this match more than delivered, and I think is easily the tops of them all. How rare is it that the third movie in the trilogy is actually the best? You get cameo appearances from Spike Dudley, Rhino, and Lita respectively, thick bumps, car crash, bodies everywhere, E&C win it again. Number 8, Shawn Michaels versus Kurt Angle, WrestleMania 21. This here was a pretty simple program, set up at the Royal Rumble that year, and sometimes the formula is just really that simple. In fact, a lot of these late Shawn Michaels WrestleMania programs either begin at the Rumble or shortly thereafter. It was time to put these two on the grand stage against each other one-on-one. Shawn was coming off main eventing Mania 20, and Angle himself was coming off a losing Mania bid to Eddie Guerrero. Shawn did his Shawn Michaels stuff, and Kurt Angle did his Kurt Angle stuff, and it's one of those beautiful things where two guys just kind of meet in the middle, and it ended up being an awesome match. This was also clearly the moment that the Mania 21 crowd was probably looking forward to the most, given the star power, as the actual main events that year were the aforementioned Batista and John Cena launching pad matches. What's actually cool about this match psychology-wise is that it wasn't even a title match, which helps it be special, I think. Most of the times when you have a title match, it kind of forces the hand and they become somewhat predictable. Here it was pretty clear either guy could win, and I think that enhanced the drama of the crowd. Speaking of the crowd, they were pretty evenly split. Even though Angle was basically working the program as a heel, Shawn taps out to an extended Angle lock, and Angle proved superior on this night. Number 7, Shawn Michaels versus Bret Hart, WrestleMania 12. A 60-minute Iron Man match at WrestleMania. Quite the thing to think of, and in the year of 1996, probably the only two guys who could be able to get such a thing done. I was 12 years old at the time, and I bought the boyhood dream, hook, line, and sinker. Of course, there had been 60-minute draws and stuff like that in the past, but even as a child, I kind of believed that those were gimmicked time-wise. This was going to be 60 minutes at a WrestleMania. Clearly, when Shawn rode into the building on a freaking zip line, the message was pretty clear that this, my friends, was your new hero. The match had plenty of rough spots, nonetheless told an amazing story, goes 60 minutes without a fall, Michaels just barely escaping death's grip as he was in the sharpshooter as time expired. Match gets restarted, much to the chagrin of Bret, and HBK ends up stealing the victory with a pair of super kicks. The fallout from this match and the politics backstage worked the two men up into a shoot, and we all know where that ended up. Number 6, The Rock versus Hulk Hogan, WrestleMania 18. Icon versus icon, a match we all never thought we would see. Hulk Hogan was brought to the WWE as part of a heel trio that was the rekindled New World Order with Hall and Nash, and the whole build to this match was designed to make Hulk the ultimate heel under the WWE banner. They even went as far as to smash into Rock's ambulance with a truck. All of this in the end was for naught though, because Hulk Hogan and The Rock faced off in Toronto at Mania 18, and the crowd absolutely cared nothing about the storyline and were just all in awe of such an encounter. Most people assume that the crowd was 50-50, and that's the popular narrative passed on. But watching back, I think the crowd was just slightly more Hogan, and you could tell this by the way that The Rock kind of switches his attitude mid-match. Knowing and sensing exactly what was going on around him, it was a resurgence of Hulkamania right before our very eyes. Hogan falls to the Brahma Bull though, and does the man-up thing and shakes his hand, and ends up celebrating in the ring like Hulkamania would, much to the dismay of his NWO friends. Heel Hogan lasted all of a month or so in WWE. That's if you don't count how he gets booed when he comes out nowadays. Number 5, Stone Cold Steve Austin Austin versus Bret Hart, WrestleMania 13. In June of 1996, Austin 316 was born, and from there, not exactly a rocket, not even a jetpack, but more like a real nice helicopter was strapped to the back of Steve Austin. And slowly but surely, he built momentum and gained fans, so much so that when Bret Hart returned from a sabbatical in November 1996, Austin and Bret ignited a feud that started with a pretty dang good match at Survivor Series 96. From there were a lot of shifts and turns that happened. The WWE title changed hands 4 times in early 1997 en route to what was more than likely the most lackluster and least ordered WrestleMania show, well, ever. In a perfect world, this match doesn't even happen as the plan for a Shawn versus Bret rematch, but long story short, Shawn lost his smile, and instead we get Austin versus Bret, who were still kind of feuding with each other and chasing for the title. The match ends up being billed as a submissions match, with the addition of Ultimate Fighter Ken Shamrock as a special enforcer and referee. Shamrock kept things fair, but also stayed out of the way, and from there, the two had an absolutely brutal contest that most remember for Stone Cold bleeding excessively, passing out before he could officially submit. Most would say that even though 316 was born 9 months prior, this is what made Stone Cold a bona fide star. Number 4, Shawn Michaels versus Razor Ramon, WrestleMania 10. The year was 1994, and I would say 95% of the WWE audience had never seen of nor heard of a ladder match before. A match that was apparently created in Stampede Wrestling in Canada. Bret Hart actually brought the idea to the WWE and used it on some house shows, and while Bret Hart got the big title win at WrestleMania 10, the ladder gimmick was slipped to Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon. What makes this even more intriguing was that the storyline lead up, where Shawn Michaels was forced to vacate the title, Razor gets crowned the new champion, and then Shawn comes back with his own belt, claiming that he had never lost it. The match itself did anything but disappoint. The two men approached the match in a whole new way, even though to the majority of fans, it was a new match anyway. That's what is so amazing about it. It set a whole new standard, or started the standard, depending on who you ask. Shawn and Razor would use the ladder as a weapon, as well as Shawn doing high-risk bumps off of it. Goes without being said that every ladder match ever since then has to be at least as good, if not better than this one. It is the measuring stick, I think, still to this day, almost 30 years later, and we can overlook a few things in the match, like Shawn purposely catching himself in the rope for the finish. Number 3, Ricky Steamboat versus Randy Savage, WrestleMania 3. The first of its kind, really. In WrestleMania's then short history, no one had really been able to capture a workhorse work rate match on the grand stage. Sure, some things were entertaining, but nothing had been yet seen like this up until this time, and Savage was a rising heel in the company holding the Intercontinental Championship, and Steamboat was the unstoppable force babyface ready to take that title. You also add in a little side feud here where George the Animal Steel was involved and infatuated with Miss Elizabeth. Now, instead of this all becoming sports entertainment fodder, they worked it into the match, which had amazing psychology, and it better had, since every spot was written out and given a number by Randy Savage, which Ricky Steamboat then had to memorize. Crash course, typically this is not how things are done in the wrestling business most of the time. Either way, Steamboat gets the big win, and for whatever reason he would end up derailing in the WWE and leaving, but just a year later, Savage would be rising to the top and the WWF Championship at WrestleMania 4. Number 2, Stone Cold Steve Austin versus The Rock, WrestleMania 17. We covered the other two, which of course made the list previously. There was just something special about this one. The storyline wasn't necessarily strong going in. In fact, it did feel somewhat somewhat thrown together, but once the two men got in there and squared up, the Astrodome crowd was electric. In Austin's home state of Texas, you would think the crowd would be strongly behind him, but there was definitely some Rock fans in the house as well, and they were clearly audible. The two have a very physical match that ascends into weapon usage when all of a sudden Howard Finkel makes an announcement that the match was now a no-holds-barred match. While it was strange, it opened up the match to get more violent, especially with the heavy steel chair usage. Vince McMahon shows up inexplicably, but soon it became pretty clear what was happening. We were witnessing an attempted Stone Cold Steve Austin heel turn. Austin decimates Rock with a chair and gets the pin and goes on to celebrate with his biggest arch rival, Vince McMahon. Now, many feel that this was a mistake, and I can't disagree with that. Even Stone Cold Steve Austin himself wishes he wouldn't have done it, but it did happen. By the end of the year, the experiment would be over. Number 1, Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels, WrestleMania 25. Well, here it is. A match that wasn't even a main event, wasn't even a title match. In fact, it was stuck in the middle of a WrestleMania 25 match card. What if I told you that this match was so good that the crowd never actually recovered from it the rest of the night, and everything after that on the card paled in comparison? That was this match. The Undertaker's streak became secondary, and for the first time ever, I think, I actually believed that it may end. The middle of the match, I questioned my sanity. This match made me realize how much of a true art this thing of pro wrestling is. The goosebumps that you feel after a near fall, chills that run down your spine when you hear a certain entrance song, the magic of it all, that's what it's all about, and that's why we keep coming back. Well, that's it. I'm actually kind of sad, but don't worry, there will be more lists, more videos, more fun to be had, so make sure you join us here and subscribe to see more stuff. Also, please feel free to comment your top 10 Mania matches or just what your personal favorite WrestleMania match is in general. Of course, this is all subjective. Please leave a like on the video on your way out. Thank you very much for watching. We will see you next time right here on Pro Wrestling Planet.